do after we do roll call, can we do? I don't know if you can look on your screen and then ask people to do an introduction. So I don't know that everybody is familiar with everybody who's on the call.
Sure, we can do that.
Thank you. And staff, a reminder to make sure your video is on when you are addressing the group.
Yep. Okay, we are ready to go.
All right. Well, welcome everyone to this joint meeting between the River Falls City Council and the Utility Advisory Board for November 17th, 2020. We're going to start tonight's meeting by taking a roll call. We'll start with the City Council.
Mayor Toland.
Here.
Bierstead.
Here.
Downing.
Here.
Gagne.
Here.
Morsat.
Here.
Odine.
Here.
Plunkett. Watson.
Here.
Richter.
Here.
Spafford.
Here.
Swanson.
Here.
Toom.
Here.
Wells Mangold.
Thank you, Lene. It's been requested that we do some introductions tonight. I can start. So we'll go with the UAB and work up to the City Council for this. So I'm in my second term on the Utility Advisory Board, recently elected to the chair position, and enjoying learning about a lot of different things. So sitting next to Scott Morissette and having him quietly give me some hints. So I appreciate that. And I've been a resident of the city since '97. So I can walk into the South Fork and be known by somebody at this point. So let's see. Kevin Swanson, are you close by?
Yes.
Go ahead. Tell us a little.
I'm UAB member. Been on the board for about 4 years. And I've learned a lot about the utilities of River Falls in those 4 years.
Very good. Spafford, are you here? There you are.
Yeah. Second term, co-chair, and been in River Falls for almost 22 years. And yeah, enjoy working with you and Cap. Just
good. Tim, are you there?
Yes. I think I'm probably the senior member of the UAB. I don't know how long I've been on it, but I've been in River Falls since 1989.
Very good. All right. Am I missing? Kevin, why don't you chime in?
Sure. Kevin Westhouse, Utility Director. Coming up on 8 years already. Time flies, and it's a great group, great Utility Advisory Board, and looking forward to tonight. Thanks.
Scott, you're our transition piece. You're on both parties.
I was wondering if I was going to have to do roll call twice. Scott Morissette, I'm the city council representative, trying to fill the shoes of Councilmember Odine, who had the seat before I did, and learned quite a bit about the utility, and a lot of big things are facing the utility right now. So looking forward to working through those with the UAB and the city council. Thank you.
Good. I'm just going to kind of go across my screen here. Mr. Gagne.
Thank you, sir. Been on council, so I think 2012. Started when I was a little boy here in River Falls. I moved away middle portion, then we moved back. So pretty much been in either Hudson or River Falls my whole life. City council.
Thank you. Mr. Plunkett.
Yep, moved here to River Falls in 2000. And as I look out my back window here, I can look over the river to the plant in question. So I am, appreciate this opportunity to learn more about the operations here.
Diane.
Yes, I'm Diane O'Dean. I've been in River Falls for 28 years. I've been on the council since 2013 and spent 6 years on the Utility Advisory Board, and I miss you guys. So I'm glad to be part of the workshop tonight.
Likewise. Hal Watson.
Hi, everybody. I'm Hal Watson. I'm on the city council and have had a couple of stints on the council. This is my 5th year in this most recent one, and I'm happy to be here.
Thank you. Sean?
I am Sean Downing. I was elected back in 2017. I've lived in the city about 10 years or so, and I'm currently on the park board.
Excellent. Todd?
Todd Bierstead. Let's see, I've been in River Falls this time about 9 years. I lived here before that for a while. Grew up in Troy Township, just to the north here. So like several of the folks, I've been around here for a long time. I'm on my 3rd term and anxious to learn what we have going on and see what else. Well, I guess I'm involved with River Falls Housing Authority as well.
Very good. All right. I believe I've covered the UAB and the city council. Scott, do you want to go further with that? Do you want to chime in?
Sure, we can do quick staff introductions from what I see, and then you can introduce, the presenters can introduce themselves, I think, at the time of their presentation. So Scott Simpson, the city administrator, been with the city, I think, 11-ish years now. So appreciate the opportunity to have a joint meeting. We have had a few of these in the past, but haven't had one for a while. So, and then I see as attendees or participants or folks that I've got kind of listening in, Mike Stifter, Brant Johnson, and Sam Huzza are on from the finance department are on. Let's see, who am I missing? Oh, city attorney Chris Gerhart is also available. You want to give a wave, Chris? So he's available for us today, and assistant city administrator Jason Stroud is in the meeting today. And then I think you're acquainted with Kevin and Lene, and I may be missing. I think everybody's showing on my screen, so I think that's who we've got today. So we're happy as staff to assist as we can today as we go through some of these topics. But we'll turn it back over to you, Patrick. Thanks.
Yep. Thank you, Scott. I appreciate that. All right, we're gonna get into this. We're looking at the background on the West Central Wisconsin Biosolids contract, and I'm gonna hand that to Kevin, you and Ron.
Yep.
Let's get into it.
All right, let's get into this tonight. So I was thinking about this. Sometimes I assume that everybody knows everything we're talking about. So I'm just going to take a little step back and take 3 minutes to give a little bit of background. Ron has written a really nice memo that's in your packet. I'm going to go high level here, but just talk about West Central Wisconsin Biosolids and what is that and what role do they play with our wastewater treatment. So first of all, West Central Wisconsin Biosolids is in Ellsworth, Wisconsin. So just down the road. And that's where I'm going to explain to what we ship down to Ellsworth and what it costs us. And that's in the piece of the treatment that we're talking about tonight. This West Central Wisconsin Biosolids was established in 1995. We originally had a 20-year contract with them, us and 10 other communities. There's 11 original communities. There's also 10 non-members. So right now, between members and non-members, there's 21 participants in West Central Wisconsin Biosolids that started in 1995. 20-year contract expired, and then we added on 10 years. Our current contract with West Central Wisconsin Biosolids expires in 2025. According to Mr. Gerhart with Weld Riley, he said that we should probably give them a 5-year notice of our intention. Of the 21 members, we're the only member that has not renewed their contract to this point. So They had their annual meeting today, and that was pointed out that River Falls is not yet renewed, and that's why we're having this meeting tonight. So what role does West Central Wisconsin Biosolids play in our treatment? Every single day, Ron Groth and his staff down there at the treatment plant take in between about 1.2 and 1.3 million gallons of raw sewage every day. So between 1.2 and 1.3 million gallons a day. That goes through a biological process down there. And when that biological process cleans that water, 99.5% of that water goes back into the river. It's highly regulated by the DNR. We're always consistently meeting all the DNR requirements for discharge, but that water going back into the river is very clean. And I've even threatened to take a drink of that one time, and they said, no, don't do it. But it's pretty clean water. So 99.5% of the product that comes into that plant every day out of that 1.2 million gallons goes back into the river. There is a portion of that, though, that we're unable to release back in the river. That's the solids portion of our product. And this is what we're talking about tonight, how we deal with the solids portion, that last 0.5% of what we get in every day. What we do with that last 0.5% is we ship it down to Ellsworth, to West Central Biosolids. When we ship it down there, it's 3% solid and 97% liquid form. So it's still pretty slushy. We put it in big trucks. It goes down to Ellsworth and they treat it. That is the portion tonight that we're discussing whether or not we should continue to have West Central Wisconsin Biosolids treat, or can we do that ourselves at a more reasonable value? So that's the part we're talking about. That last 0.5% that's not treatable, we call it solids. We spend about $400,000 a year treating that at West Central Wisconsin Biosolids. We were up to about $450,000 to $460,000 a year before some of the loans got paid off down there, but now we're about $400,000 a year. That's with treatment and shipping down there. So you'll see that number when Christine from Trilogy talks through our spreadsheets tonight. So that's what we're talking about. We send our solids down to West Central. It's about a $400,000 venture. Can we do it more affordably here ourselves? So that's the background. Since 1995, they treat our solids. You know what it costs. Can we do it more affordably? There's two portions we're going to talk about tonight. If we do it ourselves, we have to build a facility. If we do it ourselves, we have to analyze the costs. So we have Strand Associates here tonight. We have Randy Wirtz and Ryan Yentz from Strand to talk about what would it cost for River Falls to build their own facility to treat the solids. They're going to go first, and then when they're done, Christine DeMaster and Eric Granum from Trilogy Consulting is going to walk through the numbers for you and give us 3 different scenarios of what it would look like if we were to treat our own or stay with West Central. So I think without further ado, we should move into Strand Associates and talk about what would it cost River Falls to build our own portion to treat the solids. Is there any questions first before we even move into that? Did I cover that for people to know what we're talking about? If so, let's move on to Strand Associates, and Ryan and Randy, take it away.
Hi, everyone. Do we need to share our presentation, or do you have it up on the system, Lene?
If you could share it, that'd be great.
Okay. Can everybody see that?
Yes.
Fantastic. If anybody has any difficulty hearing, just let us know. I'm Randy Wirtz. I've known Ron really frankly since he was back in Minocqua. And we were very pleased to be able to provide this project, the study for River Falls. So in 2019, we started this. It was a wastewater treatment plant, Biosolids. Kevin was referring to as solids. We call it biosolids typically, so they're the same thing. We studied different ways to manage it versus going to the West Central facility. So the agenda today, we only have about 10 or so slides. It'll take about 10 minutes. We'll talk about the project scope. We'll talk about what the equipment would look like at your plant if you decided to do it on your own. We'll talk about the costs, both capital and ongoing O&M costs on an annual basis, and how the solids would be handled. It's not like they go to nothing. It's not like they disappear. You still have solids at the end of the process, but they're very inert and can be used in beneficial ways. And then what the next steps would be if you were to do it on your own. I'm going to turn it over to Ryan to walk through the details here.
Thanks, Randy. So going over the scope of the report and study that Randy and I had helped the city with in 2019 was to evaluate producing Class A biosolids at the River Falls treatment plant. The Class A portion of biosolids is simply a higher quality product than a Class B. We won't get into the specifics of the differences between the two in our meeting today, but the Class A is a little bit more flexible as far as the disposal. The two types of Class A systems that we looked at were a belt dryer and a paddle dryer. We developed budgetary costs, including capital and operation and maintenance costs. And then our study compared the alternatives to the current method, which is hauling the sludge to that West Central Wisconsin Biosolids facility. And then we summarized this in a brief report. Our presentation today, we're going to focus more on just the River Falls going on your own portion, and we'll let Trilogy discuss comparing the alternatives from a cost standpoint. So the first thing we did was we solicited equipment proposals from 3 manufacturers that are listed here. These included the BCR BioScrew paddle drying system, the Comline Sanderson paddle drying system, and a Huber belt drying system. There are other equipment possibilities that are similar to these that may be lower or higher cost. But these are the 3 that were included in our system, in our study. The 4 pictures on this slide are pictures of the equipment that would be similar to what would be installed at the River Falls facility. The dryer shown is a picture from the Wisconsin Dells facility that would be of similar size to that at the River Falls facility. I'm going to pull up a video here, which does a decent job of showing the drying process. What's shown on the screen now is the wet cake phase, which is still a thicker material than what is currently hauled to the West Central Wisconsin Biosolids facility. What's the piece of equipment being shown is a paddle dryer, and the pieces that are kind of rotating in between each other are the paddles, which effectively heats up the solids. The product is moving from left to right in this video, and you can see it starts to dry out and becomes much more granular, looking and feeling more of the consistency of dirt and sand as opposed to mud. This product at the end is fine enough where it can be used as fertilizer for plants from a homeowner or a farm perspective. But this gives you an idea of what that end product would look like. From a cost standpoint, the equipment that's required to produce Class A biosolids is ranges between $2.5 and $3.2 million. We incorporated a small amount, $350,000 for changes to the existing building that's at the treatment plant, and the remaining half of our capital costs include electrical, mechanical, site, in addition to contingencies and engineering. The total anticipated capital cost for the project to go on the city to handle this on their own is approximately $6.1 million for on-site drying. We do want to note that we do think that this is a a fairly conservative estimate due to the high-level planning study that was completed. We do not see the capital costs going higher than this. And then in addition to capital costs, we had an anticipated annual operation and maintenance cost of $165,000, which is less than half of what Kevin had mentioned as the operation and maintenance costs of the current operation. This slide contains a general site layout of the treatment plant. The green box outlines the existing biosolids facility. This is a relatively new building that was constructed in the treatment plant, and the new equipment would predominantly fit in this existing building. A small 300 square foot addition would be added to for the drying equipment, and then the blue box outlines a truck loading bay which would store the dry product before it gets hauled to for land application or taken by someone, a citizen in the public. One of the big concerns about the biosolids in general is disposal. When you dry the product, you're taking away a lot of that water, which significantly decreases the volume that would need to be applied on farm fields, or citizens can also take it as fertilizer. Farmland is becoming more difficult to obtain for this land disposal, so that's another benefit of the drying technology. The other benefit of the Class A dried product is that there is likely no cost for disposal. It is generally considered desirable product for farmers and citizens, so they will likely take it free. We assumed that there was going to be no charge for this use, and it would just be considered a public benefit. Moving on to the next steps, this table outlines a potential schedule if River Falls decides to move forward. The study that we completed in 2019 was fairly high level, so we would suggest if the city decides to move forward with withdrawing from the regional facility, that a more detailed planning effort to better define the costs and submit a facilities plan to the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources be completed in 2021. The design would be proposed to start in the first quarter of 2022. It's about a year design process with a bid opening in the second quarter or early part of 2023. That would give the contractors a 2-year construction window to end construction in the second quarter of 2025, prior to the end of the West Central Wisconsin Biosolids Facility contract, which expires at the end of 2025. If anybody has any questions about the River Falls specific option, we'd be happy to answer them now. Sorry.
Mr. Mayor. This is Hal.
Go ahead.
The 6.1 million cost, does that include the project management and the design phase? In other words, you call that a capital cost, but is that like the whole project cost, to actually get from beginning to end, aside from the study that's been done so far?
That's correct.
Okay. And then with the Class A product that comes out, if that's attractive for farmers and people to use, are other municipalities or regional organizations providing that already in our area? And kind of what does it cost to manage that program? Even if you're giving it away, somebody's got to kind of keep on top of who's coming and going and how to kind of make all of that happen so that, you know, you don't end up with a gigantic pile of it and nobody to get it, take it.
I'll say this. I think Ron probably would like to chime in as well. So in most communities that do this, the landscapers, the local landscapers are very keen on it, and they will take everything you have and then some. So that's generally not a problem. In some communities, they'd like to save some for the community residents to pick up for their gardens and things like that. So we haven't seen it become a problem anywhere yet when places do this, and it's not like River Falls is this. You're not going to have a lot of this material. You'll be able to sell. You probably will actually get a small price for it if you want to. It won't add up to a whole lot because there just isn't that much material left at the end of the year. But it's a good question because that's always a concern, but we haven't seen it be an issue yet. And Ron has some experience back at Lakeland Sanitary District. They had a Class A process there, so don't put you on the spot, Ron, but I know you and I have talked about that.
Right. Yeah, Randy. Randy's correct. We did have, it was a different process. It was thermophilic digestion. Tougher to operate than what we're looking at here, but it produced a really nice product. Once we got it to a consistency where you could basically spread it in a fertilizer spreader, people would come and get it, flower gardens, regular gardens, landscaping, everything you can imagine. We never had trouble getting rid of it. We didn't charge for it, but we did. If somebody came in with a bigger truck they wanted loaded, we did have a charge for loading. So they'd have to pay a fee for loading. So, but and the other question, part of that question too, I'm not aware of anybody in the area that has a product like this, not in the immediate area. There are other places in the state of Wisconsin though.
I have a question if it's good time.
Go ahead.
Does the product, can it be spread in the winter, or is there still that 6-month thing that they can't use that Class A product?
So you generally wouldn't want to spread it in the wintertime, and you're not going to have enough product to even probably worry about in the wintertime. More than likely what's going to happen is that you'll probably store it over the winter at the plant. Or you'll have a contract with the landscaper to come and pick it up during the wintertime, and they'll stockpile it. The benefit of the Class A is you can stockpile it pretty much almost anywhere you want, and it's not a regulatory concern. So it's the issue of storing it or landfilling it over the wintertime kind of goes away because you just don't have very much product left, and it's easily stockpiled. So, but you really wouldn't want to be spreading it in the wintertime. I imagine maybe it's possible in certain circumstances to do that, but I don't think most places would.
And we did size. Oh, go ahead.
My other question was,
we did size this this truck loading bay and dried product storage for 6-month storage as well.
Okay. And my other question was, Kevin mentioned the $400,000 a year our costs to the Ellsworth plant. Does that include the trucking to haul it over there?
Yes.
Well, in the packet, when I was reading through it, it said the trucking was included in the processing cost by gallon. So I'm confused as to why we'd be paying trucking if it's included in the processing cost per gallon.
Ron, you want to clarify that?
Yeah, there's a separate charge. So we paid trucking by the gallon, per gallon hauled, and then the process is per pound of solids. So there's 2 different charges there. The trucking is a separate charge from the actual processing charge.
The packet says it's included, Ron. The trucking's included in the processing.
Which part of do you know what presentation that's in?
I don't know what page it would be on, but it's.
So we basically they might have took the whole 400,000 as about what we paid total, but there are 2 different. There's 2 different. That 400,000 number is the right number for the total, for the trucking and the treatment. But it's two separate charges at the facility. So I don't want to confuse anybody, but at $400,000 a year is about what we pay now total. So.
Okay, well, maybe that needs to be looked at, just to clarify.
Patrick, I have a couple of questions.
Go ahead, Mark.
So Randy or Ryan, could you explain to us the sizing and how long will this facility be good for before we have to upgrade it if we're looking at the population growth of River Falls? And the second question that kind of goes with that is, I don't know, Kevin or Ron, have you considered allowing other municipalities to bring their product to us like we would to the Ellsworth facility? Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. I'll take the first part of the question on the sizing. The sizing is taking into account the growth of the city over a 20-year period. We used population projection data that was approved by the Wisconsin DNR from the facilities planning effort. That was also done in 2019 for the treatment plant upgrades that are currently under construction. So the drying and the solids equipment is sized to be able to handle the future 2040 projected solids loading, given it operates for 4 days a week, 24 hours a day. And then Ron, if you want to take the second part.
I mean, I'm just going to add a little bit to that. So as Ryan just said, it's actually for the system that we looked at, it's the smallest dryer that they make, and it's only going to operate about half of the time, a little bit more than half of the time. So if there was significantly more growth, you would be able to handle it through this system. Or to your point, if you decided at some point in the future you would allow other communities to bring their material, you would have capacity to do that. But I don't know that that's really the plan here, but I'll let Ron that or Kevin.
Yeah, and I think, Kevin and I have discussed that before. And I mean, we'd be open to it, definitely, you know, if it helped cover the costs of our operation and we had the capacity. I think, we'd be really open to that.
Patrick, got a question?
Yeah. I don't. I guess I would like to keep moving forward, but I want to be sure, Ryan and Randy, you're sticking around for the duration of our meeting, correct?
Yep.
Okay. So I'd like to invite everyone to maybe even write your questions down and hold them for the open discussion part of this. I wanted to make sure we got any clarifying questions right away. But any larger picture questions, let's hold that for the discussion part when we get to that. Having said that, can we move on to the Trilogy presentation? Is Christine ready to go?
Yes, I am ready to go. My share button is grayed out right now, so I'm able to share yet.
And as Christy pulls it up, I just want to let everybody know that we worked with Trilogy in the past. Trilogy and Christy helped us do our water rates, 4 or 5 years ago, I believe.
Yeah. Yep.
And then she did a great job with that. And then about 18 months ago, we re-engaged her and her group to help us through this. So we've been working together for 12 to 18 months trying to come up with these scenarios that she's going to work through today. And we're looking forward to Christy and Eric to go through this. So thank you very much.
Thank you. It's good to be here. And always a pleasure working with city staff. With me tonight on the meeting is Eric Ranum, and he, had a role in all of this as well. So if I miss something or he needs to jump in and clarify something, he's available to do that. So with that, we'll jump right into our presentation. And we were asked by city staff to take the work that Strand did in their 2019 study and put that in the context of the utilities' overall finances and what that would mean for the utilities' finances and for your utility customers. Initially, we were talking about looking at two alternatives. One is the one that Randy and Ryan just presented as far as building your own facilities and producing your own biosolids from those facilities. The second one was the one where you would renew your contract with West Central, and then they would construct what has been presented to city staff as their preferred alternative. I know the numbers are moving a bit on this one. The source that we had was from a spreadsheet from May of this year that indicated that that was a $23.5 million project. It may be a little bit less now, but it really doesn't change the overall, I guess, conclusions of our analysis. And then in the course of discussing these with city staff, we decided to take a look at another alternative that was on West Central's spreadsheet, which was a less costly alternative to continue the same process that they have right now and just essentially replace and expand some facilities at a cost of about $12.2 million. So those are the three alternatives that we were looking at for this study. And for all three of these alternatives, we were looking at this from the perspective of the River Falls Sewer Utility and your utility customers. And we wanted to take a holistic approach to evaluating the financial impacts of any of these options. And it's a real kind of high level, rough preliminary look. So as I said, some of these targets are moving. And as I go through the presentation, we'll talk about the assumptions that we built into our analysis, but also just comment at certain places as to how those might change. So the kinds of things that we took a look at in this were with the financing, if you do decide to do your own improvements, and what the impacts would be on issuing additional debt for the utility. Looking at kind of long-term what your cash flow would look like and reserve levels. What might that mean for the need to increase sewer rates for your customers? And also just wanted to say we built this into kind of the context of what do you have for debt service now? What's dropping off in the next few years? What other capital improvements do you have coming up and things like that? And we did also do a net present value of both the capital and the O&M for each of these alternatives. Again, looking at your perspective and taking into account how those things would be financed. So just to give some background too on what your costs have looked like from West Central Biosolids facility. And I will say that their costs have been increasing over the last 4 years. And there are several pieces to that, which was alluded to in the last discussion. So the biggest portion of that is processing and replacement fund deposits. They did have some debt service that was paid off in 2017. There's a small kind of fixed administrative charge that they bill out to all of their communities. And then there's the transportation expense. And so both the processing and replacement portions of that, as well as the transportation, have all been increasing anywhere from, I think the smallest bump is that 2020 budget. I don't know how that's going to play out with actual this year, but that's about a 3% increase there. But for prior years, their expenses have been going up, 8 to 9.7% per year. And River Falls' share of their expenses has also been increasing. The administrative charge has not changed, but everything else, the processing and the transportation, both, you've been paying an increasing share of those expenses. So just looking at transportation expenses in 2016, River Falls covered about 12.5% of their total transportation expenses. And that has increased over the years to, now I'm having trouble seeing this over here, about 14.6%. And similarly with the processing expenses, you started out back in 2016, you were at about 16% of that, 17% of that number, and now you're up to about 18.5%. So what that has led to over time is that bill from West Central to River Falls has been increasing. So back in 2017, your total charges were about $297,000. That jumped up to about $407,000 last year. And we'll see what that works out to be this year, but probably will increase a little bit again. So those charges on average over this time period from 2016 to 2019 went up about 11% each year on average. And just to put that in perspective of your overall utility budget, your O&M budget for this year was about $2 million. So this is about 20% of your overall budget. And your O&M expenses for the River Falls utility have been increasing by about 6% per year on average. So that is a large and increasing share of your annual utility budget is those charges from West Central. So then jumping into the alternatives that we looked at, the first one we looked at was constructing your own facilities. And again, very high level, very basic look at this. We assumed that you would issue debt and construct those facilities in 2025 to be operational by 2026. As you saw with the previous presentation, that might have to start a bit earlier than that in order to be ready to go by January 1 of 2026. Your operation and maintenance costs would be quite a bit less beginning in 2026 because as you saw, that O&M expense for operating your own facilities would be less than what you're currently being charged by West Central. But on the flip side of that, then you would be taking on new debt service and would have debt service payments on your own facilities. So the major assumptions we used was that your construction costs for those facilities would be about $6.9 million. So taking the 2019 numbers and inflating them, 20-year borrowing at 2.5% interest. So your annual debt service costs were ballparking about $445,000 per year. And then taking the O&M expense, the 2019 report listed about $150,000 per year. So building in some inflation on that by 2026, maybe about $172,000 a year for that. And so we're looking at about a total annual cost of $617,000, which is more than you're paying for that right now, but it doesn't take into account debt service for West Central to add new facilities or any increases in O&M associated with that. So, and again, this is kind of providing a big, broad context of how this fits in with your overall utility expenses. So we're showing some history back to 2015 and some projections through 2030 here. The orange is showing your operation and maintenance expenses. We built in some about 2% inflation per year. And again, they have been going up a little bit more than that in recent past years, but we use 2% per year for O&M inflation for both the option where you do your own facilities and the option where you continue on with West Central, just for kind of a fair comparison. So that's the O&M. Debt service. So just want to point out a couple things that are happening with your debt service. So you have some debt that will be dropping off in 2024. So you can see that going down. That's a decrease of about $343,000 per year that you'll be paying. And then you've got a clean water fund loan currently that will be paid off in 2025. So that's another $217,000. But then if you do this project and start taking on full debt service for it in 2026, it goes up a little bit, but it's not a drastic increase because you've got some other things dropping off. And then the other piece of this is cash funded capital improvements, which I want to say for the 2025, we've got some modifications to effluent piping at the wastewater treatment plant. This 2026 is some chlorination equipment. So we just wanted to build this in to kind of see how does this fit into the context of everything that you have going on with the utility over the next 10 years or so. And this shows projected cash flow and reserve levels for the utility, again, based on all the previous assumptions that we just talked about. This line right here is recommended reserves based on the utilities policy. This, on my screen, it shows up as gold, but this line right here represents projected total reserves for the utility. And then the dashed line is unrestricted. So I guess what that's showing is that there may be a need to do a little bit of borrowing for some of those larger capital improvements that you saw in the previous tab, just to manage this reserve level. But overall, building your own facility and adding that debt service by itself would not necessarily require a rate increase. If if you want to maintain a high level of debt coverage and you issue some new debt that might trigger the need for a small rate increase to meet that. The utilities policy right now is that your net operating revenues should be 1.5 times your debt service. And that's a fairly high number. You may not be required to do that for the bonds, any bonds that you would issue for this project. So that's this first alternative, building your own facilities. The second one we looked at was staying on with West Central and having them do their preferred alternative, which the numbers we were working with were about 23.5 million. We didn't build inflation into that number. I guess a combination of trying to be conservative and also was not completely clear whether that was a current number or a projected future number. And as I said, I understand that's changing a little bit. We did take a quick look at that since then, and it doesn't impact, it wasn't enough of a reduction as far as what they're talking about now to make an overall difference in the analysis. So in this one and the next one we're going to talk about, West Central, we're assuming West Central would issue the debt and then charge that back to member and non-member communities through their monthly charges. So it would not be a debt of the River Falls utility. Again, this is another thing where I understand there's maybe some discussion about how exactly that would work, and maybe that West Central would prefer that each of the member communities take on some debt directly. But our assumption was that no, that would be their debt and that you would just be charged for it through your monthly charges. So what that would mean is you wouldn't be issuing debt, but your O&M expenses would go up considerably because a portion of their debt service would be in those charges. And so $23.5 million project, using the same type of assumptions for debt that they would issue 20-year debt at 2.5% interest rate. So their debt service payment would be about $1.5 million, and River Falls would pay a portion of that, and we're assuming that would be about 17.5%. They would also have, according to their numbers, a pretty significant increase in their annual O&M with the new upgrades, and that River Falls would share in about 17% of that. So with all those assumptions, we're looking at your payments to West Central increasing from about 410,000 or so now up to about 810,000 after those upgrades. This looks similar to the previous one, but I guess the big difference there is that the O&M you can see is climbing quite a bit faster and there's less debt service. And one thing I just want to point out about this is if you do your own facility and you issue your own debt, that debt is going to be likely a fixed amount per year. Could be structured in different ways, but you're going to know what that number is. It's going to be set once you issue that debt. Kind of one of the big wild cards, I guess, with staying with West Central is what happens with their O&M expenses and with your share of those O&M expenses as we move forward. And we try to be pretty conservative here. We're showing 2% increase in O&M per year, and that your percentage share of it would stay the same. But even with those real conservative assumptions, we are looking at that would tend to continue increasing over time. And because of that higher cost and that increase in it, we're looking at a very different picture with your cash flow for the utility going forward. And you'll see that we're projecting some persistent negative cash flow that would not get better unless you have some pretty significant rate increases. And then finally, the third one was similar to the one that we just saw as far as how it would be structured. But we did use their lowest cost alternative from the spreadsheet that they had provided back in May. So that's 12.2 million. This one also has, so that would be lower overall debt service. With that spreadsheet, they showed actually a reduction in their replacement fund deposits following the upgrades. So that would result in a little bit lower O&M for River Falls as well. Again, assuming 17.5% of the debt service would be included in your charges and 17% of the O&M and replacement fund deposit. So with that, the increase to your charges would be much lower. We're looking at about 581,000 versus the 810,000 that you saw with the previous alternative. Again, with this one, you're not going to be taking on debt, so your debt service would be lower, but you'd see some increasing O&M expenses over time. And so for the next 10 years or so, the cash flow does look pretty similar to the first alternative that we saw. However, again, the risk with this one, I guess, is just what happens with your charges from West Central Biosolids as you go along into the future. And I didn't show all the years after 2030 because that's getting a little bit farther out in time and a little bit more speculative. Excuse me. But over time, what we were projecting is that it would probably tend to see the negative the cash flow becoming negative and staying negative unless you have some rate increases, which would over time drain the utilities reserves. Again, unless you raise rates.
Christy, can I just interject on alternative 3 just for a second? We have some late information from our, we had the West Central Biosolids, like I said earlier, had their annual meeting this morning, and they did broach this alternative 3, and they were, I'll just say, they weren't that excited about alternative 3 as an alternative moving forward for West Central Biosolids. They didn't totally take it off the table, but this alternative 3 of basically upgrading lime stabilization, what they do now, they're not that excited about moving forward with that scenario. So though it is a scenario, I don't think it's a likely scenario. So I'll leave it there.
Okay. Yeah. And I neglected to mention too that, we didn't do this because we necessarily think it's viable, but just as if we could move in that direction, what might that look like? So just to summarize the findings from looking at these 3 different alternatives. So with alternative 1, it does require the utility to issue significantly more debt than the other alternatives. You do have some other debt that's going to be paid off over the next few years, so that's a good thing. That's a positive. But our projections is that this could temporarily increase your ratio of outstanding debt to operating revenues close to 4. So that your outstanding debt would be 4 times as much as your annual operating revenues. And ratings agencies like to see that number. So you've been, kind of fluctuating around 2, a ratio of 2 the last few years. So this would temporarily bump that up. I don't think it's an issue for grave concern or anything like that. Like I said, it would be temporary. So that's just something to be aware of. Also, with your carrying more debt, that would increase the amount that you would want to keep in reserves to just because your policy is to keep 1 year's worth of debt service in reserves. So that would increase that need to keep some money on reserve. And then again, the debt coverage issue, I don't know what the debt coverage requirement would be for bonds issued for this purpose. 1.25 is pretty typical. Your policy is 1.5. So if you wanted to continue to maintain that 1.5 ratio, you might need some small sewer rate increases with this option. So there's just some potential things to consider with carrying more debt. Moving on to alternative 2, this one is clearly the least cost effective. It has a higher net present value of the costs. It is projected to draw down your reserves pretty rapidly unless you increase user charge rates. And then alternative 3, it is in many ways similar to alternative 1, but over time would probably lead to some rate increases that you may not need with alternative 1. It does have the advantage of carrying less debt, so that is something to keep in mind. But again, as Kevin indicated, and it seems like that is not necessarily a viable option if West Central is not interested in doing that. I guess this is kind of summarizing again what I said in the previous slide, but we don't have any strong recommendations other than I guess it's very, very clear that alternative 2 is the least cost effective for the utility and would definitely lead to the need for some future rate increases versus the other options. So I guess that with that, I'm open for questions.
Patrick, if I might.
Scott, go right ahead. I saw you coming.
So Christy, could you take me through the methodology if West Central changes the equipment and upgrades their equipment, and we're projecting in the modeling that you have a 2, would you say 2 or 2.5% O&M expense increase each year. What was the thought process? I would think those would remain relatively level or even decrease and then maybe increase, after a 3 to 5 year period. But if the process is going to be more expensive to operate, why would they even consider it? I guess I want some perspective from you on how you came up with that methodology.
Okay. I mean, there's been different things that were provided from them over time. So we were trying to interpret those and put those into place as best we could. But with alternative 2, with theirs, the worksheet that they had provided to the city back in May showed that the operation maintenance cost would increase. They showed that number going up by about $390,000 after so like year 1 of the project being in place.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, I don't really have an answer to why that number was in there,
but your methodology was based on information that they provided you that said, hey, here's what we're going to do.
Right.
Okay. So my next question, this isn't necessarily to you, it's probably more to staff, is that as a member owner of that organization, what are we doing to keep their feet to the fire a little bit with this expense control? One of the things that I really don't care for, and I hate to be an armchair quarterback here, but we're paying the same trucking costs as New Richmond does, and they're coming an extra 20, 25 miles. It just doesn't seem like the management of this organization has been, and I'm not trying to be critical of the staff oversight here, but it just doesn't seem like it seems like there should be a little bit more checking under the hood here. As I mentioned, it doesn't make any sense for me if you're going to add relatively new equipment. The only reason you do it is to drive your costs down, and they're showing them going up.
Patrick.
So that's one question I've got.
So maybe I can help elaborate on that a little bit. And council may be surprised to hear me take this view, but so I'm not that skeptical of the management of the biosolids. I think to be fair, we didn't raise electric rates for 14 years either, and then raise them up. So, their cost control from my 30,000 foot view has been reasonable.
Okay.
What they're talking about doing is installing the same process that we're talking about. So again, to be fair, they have what they have determined to be an obsolete and unsustainable process. It happens to be less expensive than the process that we have even agreed is what we would put in place, which is this Class A product. So I think, to be fair, they are talking about taking a pretty big leap from the Class B to the Class A. They have a number of reasons that they've identified as commissioners why they would make that leap. I think it's reasonably justified for them or us, in essence, as you've raised, council member, as the owners, to say, if you're going to stay in a regional biosolids business, you want to be in the Class A business, not the Class B business, based on a number of reasons that they've discussed for years, and challenges, and frankly, just some fatigue, I think, about having to deal with Class B solids and some of the uncertainty that comes with that. And I think some of it is exacerbated by the regional approach. You've got basically more of the Class B problem than you would if it was just your own Class B problem. Now you've got everybody's Class B problem. So to be fair, I think Biosolids has done, if you kind of look back at their 25-year or so results, it's been reasonable. The context that I understand for the transportation issue, which is a considerable issue here when you look at it purely from the River Falls perspective, because that's driving a lot of our cost, I believe, is that they wanted it to be geographically neutral when they set up the bylaws. So they didn't want to have a big tussle about where this plant was going to go and have essentially bigger users get it closer to them so that their costs were lower. And then the smaller guys all would have to pay a lot because they were farther away or whatever. That's how I read the minutes, the history, how all this kind of got put together is make it neutral. And it's basically no harm, no foul. So if you're in Luck, Wisconsin, you're not going to be fighting to have the biosolids put in Amory rather than Ellsworth. You're just going to pick a site and then everybody's going to kind of share in the cost. So that, you know, if you want my perspective as staff, kind of looking at this now for a number of years, including I was the alternate on the commission for I don't know how long, not too long, but way back when. And I think they've done a reasonable job of managing what they have, but they're talking about going to Class A and then the scale, scope, and other things is different. And I still can't understand why the economy of scale is not working in everybody's favor, all the members' favor. But they don't all have the option that we have because most of the members do not have the land or the ability to basically issue the debt and do this themselves. And as the folks from Strand has indicated, I think we're buying one of the smallest units you can buy to do this process. So until you reach River Falls or Wisconsin Dells size, or Marshfield or other cities of that size, it isn't. My understanding is it doesn't make a lot of sense to do that. So I'm not sure why the economies of scale are not matching up yet. But if you think about it, we're talking about $4 million of debt if we're going to go in with our neighbors and $6 million if we're doing it our own. That's not a huge difference. It's really that trucking cost that kind of eats away at us. And they've been reasonably conservative in their coverage and their replacement funds and other things. So I don't know how many years, but they do have even the possibility to refund kind of net earnings at the end of each year. And I don't think we've done a tremendous analysis on that to say whether, you know, over time we've got this much back or nothing back or had to pay in at the end. But I probably overtalked that, but I just want it I actually do want to make sure this isn't a pick on West Central Biosolids. And I know that's not where you were headed, Mr. Morissette, but
no, it's not. But I appreciate the perspective.
But the perspective is, I don't think this is a mismanaged or poorly operated. I think it's essentially we're going to have a choice about what the risk and reward is for us to stay in. And we didn't ask these folks to provide that, so we can talk about it in our discussion. I mean, there's risk like, you know, regulatory risk. What if you're by yourself, you take on the risk all by yourself.
Well, that's the next question I've got on my list.
It's easier for the DNR to pick on us than to pick on 11 of us. So there's some risk when you move away from the model.
Well, and that's my next question was, you know, we just saw the DOT, which didn't help with transportation costs, change the weight requirements, which drove up the cost. I think those changes happened in November of last year, or this spring. I can't remember which, but that's an issue as well. If we're the sole operator and the DOT or the DNR change, I mean, the DOT change came kind of out of left field, if I'm not mistaken, with the weight and the restrictions. And based on what we've been hauling, based on the permit we've had to haul, and all of a sudden they decided, no, we don't fit under that permit anymore. You know, that expense bears directly on us. The other question I've got, or the other thing I want to explore a little bit, if I could, I don't want to take up all the time here. I know Mr. Downing's got a question, but do we have a rating for the sewer? Do we have a bond rating for the sewer today?
We do.
What is it?
I knew you were going to ask that one.
Well, good, because that's the question I want to answer.
I think our sewer is rated one behind. Whatever the city is, what, AA2?
AA2.
So I'm guessing I can look that up. Let me look it up on our official statement and we'll get back to you.
So as we as you're looking that up, I guess my other question is, this is not in the CIP budget. This is not, I mean, this is just kind of popped up. You know, I think that Christie's done a nice job of giving us the, here's the impact of what this means, but what's the impact to the city from a standpoint of, you know, I hope we wouldn't have to pull this in as a GO debt, or you know, use our GO bonding, which would be a better rating, obviously. But we've got a dam question that's going to rear its ugly head here soon. We've got the North Interceptor. You know, we've got other things in the CIP budget. We just recently issued for the police department. So I've got all these other questions about this one's sort of, you know, coming out of the stands here, and all of a sudden it kind of impacts us. And what does that do to our long-term ability to do a downtown redevelopment plan or something like that? So those are some of the questions I'm looking for, or for some of the answers I'm looking for.
Yeah, and I just want to pipe in a little bit on that too,
Sure.
because I didn't address this, but we did factor in the North Interceptor project into our analysis, and it doesn't really pop out on here because we assume that it would be borrowed for. So when I talk about the debt increasing for the utility, that does take into account that project and issuing debt for that project. And we assume that would be a revenue bond as well as this particular project as well.
Okay.
So, I mean, Scott can speak to it, I guess, as far as the general obligation borrowing side of it. But for our analysis, we assumed it would all be revenue bonds.
Okay. So we're going to stick with revenue bonds and go that way. And what do those revenue bonds, as far as the debt service go, then I see 1.5 times debt service on the analysis. Do they all stay within that bandwidth? That's fairly high. I mean, I would think 120 would be fine.
Right. So with this first alternative where you're borrowing for your own biosolids facilities, it would drop below the 1.5, and eventually it may drop below the 1.25. You know, 10 years out or so is what we were looking at. So, you know, there might be a need for a little bit of a rate increase to bring that up. And again, it depends on whether you want to try and stay with that 1.5 or if you're comfortable with whatever, you know, is required for the bonds.
Yeah, I mean, it'd have to be whatever the bond condition becomes. I mean, if the covenant is 1.5, then I guess we've got to stay at 1.5 and just increase rates. But I would hope we could be in that 120 to 130 bandwidth instead of 150.
Yeah. And if it's to that level, then you'll be good for quite a while. I mean, again, there's a lot of assumptions built in here, and you know.
I understand. It's a bit of a crystal ball thing. I mean, the 250, you know, the 250 in 5 years from now, who knows?
Right. That's a little bit. You could probably get less than that now, but again, 5 years from now, it's hard to say. So.
If the yield curve stays where it is, then yeah, we probably get a little less.
Yeah.
I need to chime in on debt here just real quickly too, as we're talking about debt. So also this morning at the West Central Biosolids meeting, it seemed like West Central Biosolids had an appetite for each community taking out their own debt for the West Central Biosolids facility. And Christy kind of alluded to the fact that we assumed West Central would take on that debt and then spread the debt out. What I heard this morning was they were kind of hoping each community would take on their own debt and then give that money to West Central to build their facility, which I chimed in and said that's going to be difficult to do, but that was kind of what they were to would happen.
And that would be a very different picture than what you with this alternative too, because then your debt service would be higher, your required reserves would be higher. You wouldn't see this drop here. This would go up, you know, be up a little bit higher. You'd have to make coverage on that amount. So there's a whole lot of things with that. It would make this one look worse.
I think that'd be a god awful nightmare for them to manage. Trying to get Luck, Wisconsin, and not to pick on Luck, but just given the size of their community, I just think it would be a nightmare to try to orchestrate all those all those folks at
Yeah,
once
so
getting
that was
debt
that,
service.
that was my comment, but
Sean,
Sewer is AA3, Scott.
Thank you.
I'd like to get your question, Sean.
I'm done. I'm sorry. I'm done hogging the time. Go ahead.
My question, my question is for Mr. our Administrator Scott Simpson. From my knowledge and some of the history regarding Wisconsin Biosolids, isn't the expenses based on the initial time when people joined? So when they took the capital risk, they got a better locked-in plan. Isn't that part of why they have the expenses different the way they are right now?
Well, there is a differential for member and non-members. So I think I believe there's 11 members and 10 non-members right now that are part of the group. And so there's a 10% surcharge on top of the member rates for non-members. But transportation, and Ron may be better able to answer this question or provide elaboration if you'd like. But transportation is essentially being charged per gallon across the whole system, no matter where you're coming from. So we're paying 3 cents, or I don't know what the current is, Ron, but we're paying the same per gallon charges as the other places. So there isn't a discount necessarily on that for members versus non-members, unless I'm wrong, Ron.
No, that's correct. Anybody, the non-members pay a rate basically based off of their mileage. So it's kind of a fairer system. The member rate, as we went through before, everybody pays the same. So the rate per gallon, whether it's River Falls, Wisconsin or Osceola, Wisconsin, you're paying the same amount per gallon to haul that to the facility. And that was set up in the bylaws that way. So that's been that way since those bylaws were established in 1995, that every facility would pay the same rate per gallon as the member facility.
Great until the DOT changes the rules.
Right.
So yeah, right.
So
Todd, I see you. I've got a couple. I'm trying to keep this in order. There are quite a few.
Sorry.
No,
That's
you're on my list now. Chris Gagne, you got a couple?
Yeah, I have one for a couple of them actually. First one probably for Kevin, based on what we were talking about a minute ago. If West Central Biosolids is asking, say, the city of River Falls to take out its own debt, is that really kind of just the sticking point based on the renewal of contracts? That way they're not losing out on funds in the long run and not getting other municipalities essentially stuck with our debt or another municipality's debt? Is that kind of their thought?
I think maybe their thought is that they feel like they can't get that much debt in order to invest that much money. I think that's part of it. They can only get like 20% of the total cost. So they need to find that money somewhere else. Am I stating that correctly, Scott? That West Central Biosolids can't issue that much debt. They just don't have the resources to do that.
It's a function also of that's the way they did it originally. So I believe that's a familiar model. And there's advantages to that model. The advantages including it's unlikely that River Falls would qualify for USDA loan forgiveness, but there are communities that are members that would likely be able to go out and get USDA rural development funds and potentially get that forgiven. So, if they can get money for free, that's better than having the biosolids facility go out and get kind of a standard revenue bond and everybody pays the same. And some communities want to pay cash. Some communities want to go to the local bank. So I think that's why. I don't know that it's a strategy other than a familiar process.
Okay. I guess my second question would kind of go back to building our own facility. We talked about having to store some of these biosolids possibly over the winter months. Can we get some kind of visual or idea of how much product we're going to have over that 6-month winter mark, or maybe add in a second component to that So that 6-month winter mark, but then also the year. I mean, and do we have to build a facility to house this? Is it hazard? Do we have to worry about it running off into our rivers, or is this something that we could just put out back as like a dry fill until somebody wanted to come buy it?
Ron, that's probably for you.
Yeah, I don't know if Randy or Ryan are still on. You want to jump in on this too, but it's not a biohazard when it's a Class A. It basically, we can stockpile that stuff. And Ryan could probably jump in on the numbers. It's not going to be a huge pile after 6 months just because of the consistency of it when you're looking at 90% solids.
I'd like to try to frame that. Is it likely that we can put any excess Class A in the compost site that we have? I mean, is it that level of size, or could it be more than that?
Yeah. So
you mean the level that you have in the compost in the facility right now? You mean when it gets piled up in that facility?
So yeah, are we looking at potentially more product than would fit in the facility we already have for dirt, and we have a spot for where people come to pick up dirt?
Yeah.
Is it
thinking of a dump truck full, 2 dump trucks full over a winter, 5 dump truck fulls? I mean, I'm thinking like an excavator dump truck where you're seeing like Total Excavating's dump truck going down the road.
Yeah, it'll be more than a dump truck full, but I saw Ryan pop up there. You got a cubic yard on that, Ryan?
Ryan, did you hear that?
Randy, Ryan, we're muted yet?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
We're wondering about the actual quantity of Class A product. What are we talking about over the 6-month period? We're wondering about storage, actual size of a pile if one needs to be dropped somewhere.
444.
Yeah.
So I just did a quick count for 6 months. That's about 260 cubic yards. The building that we show, if we can share the video or share our presentation, we showed kind of the size of the building that would be needed for 6 months of storage on your site. And it's a pretty small building.
Is this something that we would want to be storing inside, or is this something that we could just set outside and in the field next to the wastewater treatment plant and let it sit over the winter?
Yeah, you could store it outside. It just depends on what it's going to be used for. More, like I said earlier, more than likely, it might be put into dumpsters or boxes that a landscaper might just come and pick up and store it at their facility. So there's a lot of, we included a building in that budget. You may not need a building like that. It wouldn't be an enclosed building. It would be a building with open sides on it, just to keep the rainwater off of it so it remains a nice product. But if you wanted, you could actually store it on land. It's not a biohazard or anything like that.
And my last question, it looked like we went from 300,000 to 400,000 from 2016 to 2019. Is some of that cost based on 3% increases on wages and insurances and that kind of stuff? But also, is there a component in there of population change? I guess, what was our population in 2016 versus today? And I mean, students and all the extra folks that are contributing to our biosolids. I mean, is that a huge factor that would come into that 107,000 increase?
Ryan, you want to talk to the increases and what caused increase?
Yeah, it is. It's more, basically, we've hauled more solids down there. Part of that increase too we're seeing is trucking costs. So last year, actually, I think it started, I can't remember, I thought it was January of 2019 when that trucking changed. So our trucking costs did go up basically for a year. When the DOT changed that, we were basically reduced by 2,000 gallons per load. So trucking costs increase, and we have been hauling more solids in also.
Do you think our population changes dramatically increases that? Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah, I mean, there's calculation for, so many pounds of solids per day per person. So yeah, the more people we add, that number's going up. If we go back to kind of the project we're doing now with our oxidation ditch, that plays right into it because we're seeing our BOD, our influent BODs, we're exceeding influent loadings because of population increase and increased amount of solids coming into the plant.
Really, I mean, some of our population changes would obviously increase some of the housing and extra utility bills and extra, obviously, revenue coming in to make up for some of that as well. But it's nice to see a presentation like this to give us a couple different options and what the yearly costs are. I guess I'd like to see what it would cost us 10, 20 years from now, just like we're kind of in this boat now on a renewal. Where are we going to be in 20 years? But I guess it's really hard to project that, right?
I should mention on that, you mentioned, Chris, you mentioned hauling. So the hauling contract, the trucking contract is up next June 30th, I believe, Ron, is that accurate? Next year. And so
it would be 2022, Kevin. It's
okay.
Actually 2022 would be up.
Okay,
June or July 1st, 2022.
I'll just say this: there was a proposal to extend that contract. I'll just say, without giving a number, there is significant upward pressure on costs for hauling.
We won't be doing any hauling, essentially, going forward.
Not if we do it ourselves. Correct. So trucking costs. There's upward pressure, significant upward pressure on trucking costs if we stay.
I'd like to let Todd get his question in as well as Mayor Dan. And then I'm going to put myself next on the list. I want to see if I can frame the question for the night, but and then make sure people are getting any clarifying questions they have for our presenters in before we just go big picture. So having said that, Todd, do you have your question ready to go?
Sure. Thank you. I noticed we have 10 non-members that are using the West Central facility too. What's to keep them from bolting if the price goes up too much? I don't know if they have contractual obligations like members do, but if we lose 5 or 10 members, and I don't know what kind of financial impact that has, but if all of a sudden they're not members or customers any longer, seems like our percentage of the thing is going to climb pretty significantly. So maybe somebody can tell me how these non-members are tied into the mix.
That's a great question, Todd. That was also brought up at the annual meeting today as well. So we talked about risks and rewards. And one of the risks of going alone is if regulation comes, you have to tackle it yourself. Risks of staying, though, with a group is if part of that group breaks up, then you're on the hook for a bigger percentage, just as you alluded to, Todd. So what was brought up this morning was non-members and keeping them in the group, and some mild concern that some would potentially bow out, which would increase costs. Ron, do you want to build on that so I don't mischaracterize it?
No, I think it is. Right now, every non-member is contractually obligated and it's staggered. I think the first one is expiring in about a year from now, a little over a year. So yeah, that was brought up. What are we going to do with non-members as we renew their contracts? Do you make them renew through the end of this borrowing cycle? Otherwise, if you give them a 5-year contract, it's just like you say, then they can walk away after 5 years. You're going to do this big increase. We're paying too much. We're getting out of here. So non-members are about 20% of the total. So they're similar. All the non-members together are similar to River Falls. So if you lost all the non-member facilities, yeah, we'd lose about 20%. Well, a little over 20% of our revenue because they pay an additional 10%.
Okay.
So.
Does that answer your question, Todd?
Thank you. Yes.
Mayor Dan?
Quick questions here. Going back to, borrowing the money for doing this ourselves. So if we're going to go out and borrow $6 to $6.5 million to do this project, I don't know if this is a question for Ron or is Sarah on board? I'm not sure. How is this going to affect any projects, any big projects that are coming up down the road? If we got to shove this one in there and borrow that much money, are we going to have money to be able to how am I trying to say this? So we can have money to be able to do whatever other projects we have coming down the road that we already have planned, or that we know that in 8 years we have to do this, or 7 years we have to do this. I was just wondering what the prognosis is on that.
So Christy did indicate that she has included the North Interceptor already in our debt coverage and stuff like that. So yeah, so that one's included, but so we try to look at some of the bigger capital costs coming forward. Please elaborate on that, Christy, then.
Yeah, so we've got 2.4 million built into this, and I want to say there was some discussion about that. I think that one kind of keeps getting pushed back a little bit, so I believe we have that included for 2022 at 2.4 million, and then that would be borrowed for. So that's all built into the projections of debt service that we have, that we talked about tonight.
Okay.
And then there's those other couple of larger projects in 2025 and 2026 at the wastewater treatment plant. I believe it was some piping modifications, and what was the other one? Chlorination equipment. So we do have those built in there. We didn't show borrowing for those, but that might be something. Those projects might be ones you'd want to borrow for, but those are more in the range of, you know, 500,000 to 700,000 as opposed to a couple million. And, you know, once you start to pay down some of this debt for this project, as well as the North Interceptor, and you get, you know, maybe 10 years down the road or so, you know, then you're in a place where you don't have quite as much outstanding debt again. So, you know, your ability to borrow shouldn't be, I wouldn't say would be compromised by this.
Okay, thanks. My other question was back to the trucking stuff. So I had heard through a little birdie today about the trucking contract coming up, and basically was told that our trucking costs when the new contract starts are going to double. So if we're paying 80, 90, 100,000 now, when the new contract starts, it'll be close to 200,000 a year just in trucking cost. Am I close to right on that?
Ron, you're close.
Yeah, I think there was a proposal put on the table that hasn't been accepted. My recommendation would be that they would go out to bid, so we'd have to see what that number was, but the number was about 82% increase from what we're paying now.
I didn't want to say it, but yeah.
That's a big that's a big debt payment every year.
That it's just short of 200,000 in 2022. Then, if we would accept that, just for trucking.
Okay, that's ridiculous. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, and I just want to add to that too. I was just quickly checking what we had built into our assumptions, and we were looking at about 130,000 for this year, and then increasing by kind of a modest inflationary. So we're a little bit low on that in our analysis.
I saw Ben had his hand up. And Kevin.
Thanks, Pat.
Thanks, Stan. Kevin, I'll get to you in just a second. Ben, I'm going to let you go next, but I just want to. What I was looking to say was essentially your question, Mayor Toland, that, you know, the big picture of considering all the projects. And I want to make sure that I have that correct. I'm going to ask Kevin, I think you're and Scott as well. Is that our big picture question? If we look at the totality of our projects, that's really our biggest consideration here.
Yeah, I mean, if I was trying to frame it for myself in decision makers' view, I think you're weighing your desire to be neighborly and partner. So there is some consideration for the fact that we keep saying they for West Central, but essentially they is us. I mean, we are a owner of West Central Biosolids, so there's that question about breaking a partnership and what are the impacts of that. And then the things that are difficult to calculate for a risk or a dollar amount, which are things like the regulatory risk of going it on our own, and, you know, kind of the variability risk of an environment, just what could happen if we're on our own, versus the pure financial analysis, which I think is pretty undisputed at this point. You can, and we have, messed with a lot of assumptions, and you still come up with the same basic understanding is our geography, which should be an advantage in the regional partnership, is actually working against us because of the way the transportation costs are allocated. So as transportation costs kind of goes up, and we expect to grow as a community, so we're going to have more and more centrate coming back to us and more sludge going down to the plant. That's been a difficult problem. It's a difficult thing for West Central to get around because we all do believe that we can do it as well ourselves, and some of us probably think we can do it better than kind of the commission has done. And I'm not sure that's the case overall, but I think it doesn't look like there's much on the financial side. So, the plant has undergone pretty significant infrastructure investment over the last 15 years. I mean, it's really very different of a plant than what was here only a few years before I arrived. When they had first, the utility board had started to first make some investments, in pretty significant investments in phosphorus and other things. So do we have a lot out there on the horizon? I think the answer with wastewater plants is always yes. I mean, it's one thing after another. Do we have a glut taken care of? I think the answer is yes. I think we've got the significant portion of our plants upgraded and in good shape and what should operate for decades. And this is not something that wasn't on our radar. I think that is part of the reason that staff started to raise these issues about 7 years ago is, hey, this just doesn't look good no matter what. From a financial standpoint, we're either going to put a bunch of money into West Central or we're going to put a bunch of money into our own plant. And so we started raising those flags, and then we eventually started to kind of go down this path of looking at what's our options. So the question that we're looking for to get answered from the UAB and the council is there a good number of you who want, regardless of the financial impact, us to really hang tight on the partnership and basically find a way to keep with the group? On the flip side of that, is there a good number of you who don't want to spend a lot of effort and time doing that? You've seen enough, or you think you will see enough, that we just need to focus our efforts on building our own facility. Where staff is probably at this point is, it doesn't seem a good idea to give up on the idea of the biosolids facility. But from a legal perspective, we're getting advice that we ought to give notice so that we can essentially preserve our right to get out. And so I don't think it's smart for us, unless there's the sentiment among the UAB and the council that you just, basically staff figure out how to work with West Central and get down there and do it. If there isn't that sentiment, I think we need to move towards, we need to give we need to put ourselves in a legal position to reserve our right to be out in 25, which appears at this time to be a good fiscal decision for us.
Thank you. Kevin, do you want to add anything to that?
No, just that Sarah Carlson, our finance director, is tuned in tonight, and she commented to me, just as we take all of our projects individually, prioritize them as they come. And she said she does like this project, and it would definitely be on the list to consider. So,
okay. Thank you. All right, Mr. Plunkett, you got a question?
Several. First off, I'll start out with, we're currently looking at, it sounds like we're running around 500 to 750 tons per year of biosolids that we're producing currently at that 90% dry ratio. And that's assuming that we're at like 1.5 grams per centimeter with the tonnage amount that you gave me. That would be for Ryan there.
We were having a hard time hearing your initial part of that. Could you just repeat what you're specifically?
Currently, we're looking at around 750 tons a year of biosolids that we're producing. Is that correct?
I think we were projecting about 450 dry tons per year.
450 dry tons. Okay.
Yeah.
And that's in the future.
That's 20 years out. You're at about 370 now. That's in dry tons. So wet tons would be quite a bit more than that.
Yep. And then equipment that you talked about, the smallest equipment, what was the processing size of that unit? So what was the capacity of that running 24/7?
Well, the capacity was, it can handle the 450 dry tons in 4 days, 24 hours a day. So if you did that ratio of, you could get almost double the capacity through it if you were willing to go 7 days a week.
Gotcha. And that's yielding us a product that would be comparable to something such as milorganite, similar smell, marketability.
It would have a similar consistency. Can you hear me? Okay. It's similar consistency. The smell would be similar. You're obviously producing a lot less. So marketability is always an issue. Even if you got a revenue from it, it would be a small amount of money.
Even at $100 a ton, we're looking at 50 grand a year or something.
Exactly.
Yeah, not huge. What are we looking at for smell on that processing facility here? I don't want this to be the Wakuta Bridge or like driving into downtown Hudson.
Go ahead, Ryan.
Yeah, each of the drying manufacturers, they have pretty robust odor control systems that the odors are very minimal.
Gotcha. As we're looking at our shipping costs, is there an option of doing further dewatering here before shipping? And would that modify our cost of participation in the West Central Wisconsin BF facility?
I think that Ron's going to be best to answer that one.
Yeah, I was going to say I'm going to just set it up, and then Ron can take it away. But yes, we can. We're doing about a 3% right now. We can go to about 4.5. But West Central Biosolids has a real tough time accepting that level of solid run once you go from there.
Yeah, if we push it up, to 4%. The trucks can't load it or get it off, so we have a real tough time. So, like Kevin said, we can get up to about 3.5. Past that, their equipment just doesn't function good enough to remove it easily.
Gotcha.
That's a little bit of a frustration. We even talked about a thicker product, getting dump trucks and all that, but they just don't have the facility to be able to take a product like that.
With our contract with the WCWBF facility currently, it sounds like we've got a fair amount invested in that. Is that all sunk costs, or do we have any options for recuperating our share of any of that capital equipment in the investment that we've made in that plant so far?
Ben, that's a great question. Chris Gerhardt and I talked about that. I said, Chris, be ready for this question. I think it's going to come up. So, Mr. Gerhardt, you want to address that?
Sorry, muted there for a second. Can you repeat that question again? I didn't quite catch all of it on the microphone there.
It sounds like we've made a pretty significant capital investment into the WCWBF facility so far. Is that all sunk costs at this point, or is there any option of recovery of at least a portion of that investment if we leave that contract with them, seeing as how we're essentially partial owner of all the capital equipment there now?
Yeah, so Kevin and I did discuss that, and if you look at the the long-term contract, which is a user contract, and the intermunicipal agreement, there's no provision for essentially getting your capital costs that you put into it. And I think part of that is this was done in 1995, and the idea was for that initial term, which has now been extended to 2025, you're essentially locked in. And that's that initial capital contribution. So if you leave, you are leaving what you've put in to the building, unfortunately. For some other agreements, for fire departments, you can get that back, but it's just not in the contract language here.
My read on that is that we shouldn't feel guilty about leaving this contract and handing millions of dollars of investment off to these other communities. In fact, we should say, we're giving you guys a whole lot of investment for free. You should thank us.
Yeah, that's certainly an argument. As far as notice is concerned, my suggestion was to give, the 5-year notice, because if you do look at the intergovernmental agreement, it talks about a 5-year withdrawal period. The long-term contract talks about being able to withdraw upon 3 months' notice after the expiration of the initial term, and it incorporates language stating that it's on the same terms and conditions of the intergovernmental agreement. So, that's why we want to give as much notice as possible, and that also gives, lets the city say, you've got 5 years to plan for the city leaving, because there are going to be increased user costs for the remaining members of West Central Biosolids. That's just a fact. If River Falls leaves, I think we're about 18% right now. Cost of everyone else that remains will go up. Their user charges will go up. But the 5 years does give time to plan for that and adjust what they're going to be spending on improvements accordingly also.
Everyone.
All right. Kevin, ready to go?
Yes. What do we got?
Oh, I'm sorry. Kevin Swanson.
Oh, Kevin Swanson. I was thinking, did I have my hand up? I didn't think.
No, you're good. Kevin, we're not hearing you. Can you turn your mute off? There you go.
So we have no other option other than these two options in front of us. We build our own, or we go with West Central.
Yeah, we think that those are the two options. We had looked at Metropolitan Council as a possible option, and that doesn't appear to be allowed under their kind of statutory setup in Minnesota. So that's the closest kind of equivalence. There are other possible options, Kevin, but I don't. Given the transportation is the main issue, I think the farther we moved away, the less likely any of those would be feasible.
But transportation is part, but the facility for the $26 or $23 million upgrade is substantial to this process, correct?
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's part of the capital cost is part of the issue. Although I think, again, our capital share of the biosolids project is less than what our capital would be for our own project.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
But if there was another regional facility out there close, that it may be worth looking at, because, essentially if we didn't have any ownership, no equity, we're just buying in, you might be able to get your trucks there for a reasonable cost, but we have not identified any other options that are that viable. The one that's closest to viable is us opening our arms up to somebody else. So doing our own facility and inviting a neighbor or two in, I won't speak for all staff. I'm awfully concerned about that alternative. Given I think the timing we have to do this all, I think it would make sense to try to figure out what we can do on our own. Potentially down the road, you could invite the right neighbor in with our potentially unused capacity, but there's plenty of politics involved with handling other people's waste products. And so you can think of some phrases you might be thinking of if, you know, we were to work with Hudson directly on this. What would that mean? So this is what staff thinks are your best two options. That doesn't mean there aren't other viable options. I just don't think they'll be very financially feasible, or maybe not. In the case of us working directly with Hudson, maybe not politically feasible, at least in the short term, but I would leave that to all of you to decide.
Hal, go ahead.
More questions. Do you, for the ongoing costs of for building our own plant, would we need to hire more staff, or what kind of and was that, if that's true or not, was that included in the projection?
That's a great question, Hal. And Ron and I did talk about that yesterday and went over the numbers. And we did it. It's not going to be a full-time person, but I believe Christy did include, was it a 0.61 employee, Ron? Was that what that was? 0.63?
It was what I think Strand actually did in their O&M costs initially set up. I think they had 31,000 in there for that.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
So we did have, yes, we did have some money in that for that, Hal. And Ron feels like it wouldn't take a full-time person, but it would take some reallocation of resources to help with some of the operation and maintenance.
Okay. A different question. What's the likely success of proposing a rate increase, to cover the cost in order to keep our debt ratio within our current targets? Is that a likely success with the board, or is that something that you think would be difficult given rate increases we've had in the past, or what's the prognosis for that if we want to try to keep our debt ratio, within our current targets? Because it sounded like, even with building our own plant, we would get squeezed slightly. That was part of Christie's presentation.
I think we would have to, I'm just going to speak personally. I think our rates are high for wastewater right now, and I don't know if there's a huge appetite for raising those in the near future. And I do think maybe we can try to find ways to cut costs or close that gap, or accept a little bit more of a reserve.
Okay.
You have to make a policy that we're going to accept a little bit less reserve, or bite the bullet and potentially raise rates or look for cost savings measures. But I personally, today, I don't have a huge appetite for raising rates. That's just me.
And just, I was going to clarify, recall that this is not regulated utility, so this is a decision up to the UAB and the council regarding rates. The only area in which regulations comes in on the rate making is potentially when you have a clean water fund loan, then you're dealing with those coverage ratios and things that are included in that, and obviously any bond covenants that you've got regarded to that. But that's, I hope to never have another clean water loan fund in River Falls if I have any say in it. So people have heard me say that before, but I think if you have a utility, it's the question I think you posed, Hal, was to the utility advisory board, and that's the right way to, that's the right place to pose it, because they're the group that ultimately would decide what appetite they have to recommend to the council rate increase, because it's not the PSC with the wastewater.
Thank you for clarifying that. And then my last question, or just this is maybe more of a point, but I think we have to, when we're looking at the big, stepping back and looking at the big picture in terms of our current and future capital improvement projects, I'm not totally clear on how segmented those projects are out by funding source. So, for example, Christy was mentioning that there are a few projects out in that 24 or 25, 26 time range that were factored into her analysis. But at the same time, we've got, we have a dam removal project that is certainly going to cost the utility funds. And, that's a bit of an unknown at this particular point in time. Would are the costs for that specifically tied to the electric utility versus the sewer? Are those separated so that's not a consideration, or there's overlap just in terms of budgets in general? Or help me understand that.
Yeah, so all debts are not created equal. In River Falls, most debts are considered equally, so we're pretty cautious with any debts. But yeah, each of the debts is assigned. Ideally, each of the debts is assigned, kind of counts against each of the funds. Now, the caveat to that is the water utility and the wastewater utility 10 years ago didn't have as good a ratings. We didn't think we'd have as good a rating success as I think we'd have now to do individual issues and individual bond ratings for those utilities. So the council has used its general obligation debt authority to kind of help the utilities along by getting better rates. There is a reason to do that at times, but that is the one place where you do have quite a bit of capacity issues if you start just piling on. So if we say, well, we're going to loan the general obligation to the electric utility and the sewer and water, and we're going to do this, and we're going to help with this, then you start to run it. We're not anywhere close on the general obligation debt to our capacity, nor do I expect to ever recommend to the council that you even get anywhere close. I don't even want to sniff the line. So, we have to be cautious about what we're doing. But I don't think this project on its own is any kind of domino or catastrophic impact to our debt strategy. It's a big bite, and it's a little disappointing because sewer rates, I think, generally speaking, are probably generally and relatively speaking are the highest of our rates. So it would have been nice to see some reduction in debt service long-term over the wastewater and O&M so that we could kind of glide down or hold the line on wastewater for a long time. And I think if we do this project, it's pretty clear that holding the line is really going to be the strategy, not reducing sewer rates anytime soon, which we have discussed previously, actually trying to bring the sewer rates down a little bit. And I don't think that's in the card in this. The hydros, do we need to think about the hydro project or the dam removal project? It's likely to impact primarily the debt of the electric utility if we go forward with projects, but there is still the issue of armoring the sewer mains coming into the wastewater plants. If that's required under the FERC licensing, you can probably make a pretty good argument that the sewer utility needs to pick that up, not the electric utility. And then, of course, we're hoping that we get outside funding on a number of those things, so that could impact the debt too. But
okay, thank you. That really helps me understand. I appreciate that.
And we had about 500,000 built into our projections for, I believe, what you're talking about here. It's described in the CIP as potential modifications to effluent piping and main sewer line reinforcements when Powell Falls Dam is removed. So I think we've got that covered, at least to some extent. We've got about 500,000 for that. So.
Thanks for that clarification, Christy.
Scott, see you've got a question.
Yeah, just a quick quick question here, and it's probably more for Administrator Simpson and maybe Kevin, but I think so we have our eyes wide open here. I'd like to hear about the conversations that have been had with our other partners outside of the meetings. I know in talking with Scott, he's talked with the Hudson administrator and the New Richmond administrator, or temporary interim administrator. And I think Kevin also brought up a point at the last UAB meeting about how this potentially, if we go down the road of our own, how this potentially changes the dynamic, if you will, of the next 5 years as we go forward. If they're starting to look at those costs and the costs keep going up, how does that change the dynamic? So that's what I'd like a little insight or a little bit of feedback from staff on that, if I could.
I'll give one sentence, Scott, then I'm going to turn it over to you. I'll just repeat what I said earlier. So the 11 members, we're the only one who hasn't renewed. So everybody else is kind of going down the path of staying with West Central. Though Scott has had conversations with some of our neighboring communities, and I'll turn it over to Scott.
Yeah, our neighbors are paying attention. So when we demonstrate a concern about something, their concern sometimes increases. I think this is one of those cases. It's a case that's familiar to me dealing with council members on a regular basis. You often sometimes get ideas from other communities and bring them to me to investigate. So I'd say that's the stage that New Richmond and Hudson are in. I certainly think they did some of their own analysis already, and they are not in the same boat as us, seeing as they've renewed at this point. And in Hudson's case, I think there's some challenges to do their own system. I don't think they have the space to do that, but it's possible that, well, I guess I won't say that. I don't know enough about that yet, and they haven't told me anything directly yet about that, but I don't think Hudson's looking for another facility other than the biosolids. New Richmond is kind of in the same boat as us, where they've got some ability potentially to do it on their own someday. So I'd say there's been no formal correspondence, Councilmember Morissette. So, but there's been informal discussions amongst the administrators, and we've just talked about our mutual concerns, primarily around the debt issuance and how that would impact each of the cities' debt ratings and how that would be pulled off. And then there's, of course, been some new discussion about how much is it going to go up? That question has been raised because I think the renewal occurred prior to, I believe some communities think the renewal was done prior to them understanding fully what the rate, what the cost implications were going to be long term. So I think their facility plan now has, I think, outlined that a little bit better. Certainly at the annual meeting today, it was apparent to me that they've expressed kind of the scope of what the cost increase are going to be. So I don't think it's a secret, but the renewals were done already. So that's where they all are. Is, you know, they've renewed. I think it was characterized at the annual meeting today, probably correctly, that some communities, this was a 5-minute phone call between the West Central Biosolids director and the utility director at the community, and others it was a few meetings or a couple of discussions, and then River Falls is kind of doing its usual, let's let's take a minute and ask a bunch of questions and do an analysis, because this is a very big deal for us. Fundamentally impacts our financial picture, and will lead us into doing our business plan for the wastewater plant or the wastewater utility. We want to kind of understand what's going on with this so that we can put that long range sustainability plan in place.
But we've been fair with them. They know that we are hesitant here.
No, I gave them absolute full disclosure that we were uncertain that we would be going forward, and that could have impacts on them. And they were appreciative of that. So, and again, we haven't spent time saying there's something fishy or bad management or anything going on at West Central. We've just indicated that we are in the middle of analysis, and frankly, they've been able to, given public information, the nature of our public information in Wisconsin, they've been able to share in all of our analysis already. So the good work of Strand and Trilogy is already spreading out to other communities. They're taking a look, and I suspect they'll look at this video tonight too, or not tonight, but they'll look at this video in the future and kind of get an idea of what the scope is.
And some of those smaller communities, and I'm not trying to pick on Luck, but some of those smaller communities don't have a lot of other options, is my understanding.
Yeah, and by the way, I don't even know if Luck is actually is a member or non-member. I think I just used that as an example, but yeah, I think this is an entirely different situation if you're a community that's taking one load a month to the biosolids. I mean, it's not probably even worth their time to think about it.
No. Thank you.
All right, folks, we're coming up on 2 hours, and I don't want to cut it off just yet, but I'd like to see if anyone's got any closing remarks they feel they need to share, and encourage you to email and communicate if you've got further detailed questions. But I'd like to move towards wrapping this up. Are there any remarks that you need to, Kevin? See ya, West House.
Yeah, I think I want to go back to where Scott was in just a second here. We probably need to kind of see if there's people who just really want to preserve the right to stay with West Central, but people who say, nope, let's not even consider it, to see what kind of people are on that. But before I go there, I just want to say, either one of these selections that we're making are expensive. Let's just be honest. I know on paper, Christie has shown us that doing it ourselves might be a little more affordable, though there's risks and rewards. Like Scott Simpson said, for both of them. So in your mind, you have to weigh out those risks and rewards, because it's probably a little bit more than the financial component of what we're talking about today. So is it okay, Pat, if you kind of want to take a straw poll? Is there anybody who just feels strongly about staying with West Central, or is there anybody who feels strongly about divesting immediately? I mean, I'll let you handle that, Patrick.
Okay, I want to ask one question before I do that. Scott, you definitely discussed the neighborly issues at hand. Are there just the finances we've had on paper, but the neighborly issue is a little more abstract? Is there anything else we're missing in that category?
I think there probably will be some more things in that category that we're missing that we haven't even realized, because again, it's easy for us to take the perspective of River Falls. It's hard to take the perspective of Ellsworth or Prescott or others. So I can do that a little bit because I've worked in smaller and larger communities. So I think I can guess where they're all at or thinking about this. But I think we're taking the high road already. And so my suggestion is we keep on that. And I think that will mitigate the neighborly or partnership negative impacts to potentially, because essentially they should have plenty of time to figure things out. If River Falls decides we're not going to renew, it would be a travesty if they just went forward as if we were, because that that would not make a lot of sense in my mind. So if they do that, that would be their choice. But I think I've tried to cover our basis a little bit for that. But again, the risk is the big thing. To me, you lose the risk, spreading that risk across multiple parties. You are absorbing some of their risk. You know, they could make bad decisions that could impact us. The PFAS thing is a weird one because if they start to throw PFAS regulations in from DNR and all of a sudden we're taking centrate, which is essentially from any of those members, and they have a PFAS generating industry in their community, we're all of a sudden now part of that. So that's, on the one hand, that's not a good thing about the partnership. On the other hand, I think as you saw with the DOT issue, we can get things done a lot faster when we have a bunch of communities that are upset about something. Whereas if it was just River Falls complaining about the DOT road rules, we definitely would not have got that kind of traction. I mean, it would have been seen as an annoyance to the legislature, and they may or may not have even bothered listening to us. But because we had all 11 members and some non-members saying, hey, this is an impact to us, you could do something. So you do lose that. You're not going to have that collective lobbying ability. And the other thing I would be hopeful if we try to preserve it is, one big reason for us to stay in West Central is if they can get a bunch of federal or state money to build this facility addition, which River Falls will not be eligible for because of our income. You know, the income is not going to allow us to qualify for these LMI, CDBG dollars or other things. Whereas if we do it as a 11 member group, we may be able to get money that we couldn't get on our own. So the net cost of the facility could go down. As Christy indicated, that's not assumed in any of this analysis, and nor could I think it would make sense to do that. But that would be a game changer if Biosolids could get $6 to $8 million grant or earmark. All of a sudden, our 17% of that is looking a lot better. So that's why I think it makes some sense to keep the door pretty wide open at this point. Although it's going to be a difficult climb.
Thank you, Scott. And I do want to ask Ron before I proceed about your confidence level as far as River Falls tackling this. You've got the technical details, but is this? I don't want to ask a conflict of interest question, but do you want to do this?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I've got roughly 33 years in the wastewater industry now. 29 of them were in different communities. I worked in a larger city, some smaller cities, medium-sized cities, similar. In all three of those other places I worked, we handled our own biosolids. Never was an issue. Some of the challenges, like Scott said, you do face some challenges on your own, but yet some of the management is easier because you're making your own decisions. So, I mean, as far as the confidence level, it doesn't concern me. I mean, I've done it before. I don't anticipate issues doing it again. And I think Randy and Ryan could talk to that too. They work with a number of communities who handle their own biosolids, which in Wisconsin is more than normal. The facility we're a part of is the exception. So there's a number of communities that are doing it on their own.
Okay, thank you, Ron. All right, Kevin, would you like, am I separating UAB from council on this vote, or?
No, I think it's maybe, I don't know. I think we're kind of all together and kind of just keep our eyes open. Hey, Ron, I want to ask Ron one more question related to the last question. So, Ron, this consortium of 11 at West Central, is that repeated anywhere else in Wisconsin, or is this the only lone situation of that?
As far as solids handling, I mean, there's some private companies, there's places that form basically a coalition, communities that'll take the sewer and everything from a different municipality. But to my knowledge, and I think we've talked about this before, Randy and Ryan, I'm not aware of another one with the largest group of municipalities like we have.
Yeah, so this is the exception in the state in terms of biosolids handling. Certainly, there's other facilities like Madison Metropolitan Sewage District. They handle all of the wastewater for the neighboring communities. So by default, they also handle their biosolids that come down the pipe. So it's different. This is the only facility that we're aware of in the state. Frankly, there are very, very few in the country that actually do it this way. There's probably 20 different facilities in the country that I can think that do it this way, which is the exception. So the vast majority, 90% plus of communities handle their own biosolids.
Thank you. I think that's good information for the group. So Scott, are you okay with us kind of taking a straw poll across the UAB and council together, or would you like them separate?
Yeah, I think as long as everybody understands the straw poll and you're not directing staff to take any action, you're just you're helping us summarize how you've talked today.
Right.
Straw poll across the group is fine. And it may be, given our new virtual format, the straw poll, it may be that we want to use hand signals or something so that you can do it relatively quickly in a straw poll. So maybe
a straw
it's
poll question, if I may.
Sure.
Just a moment. Mayor Toland, you want to chime in?
I had one quick question. Sorry. Hey, Ron, just a quick question for Ron. Ron, as a member of the Central Biosolids down in Ellsworth, how much time do you spend working there or working on the stuff? Because you're on the board as a member, right?
Correct. Yes. Yeah, I mean, yeah. So I have one meeting a month, which is a few hours a month. But yeah, then the reviewing documents, things like the budget. I mean, lately it's been quite a bit. It's hard for me to put a number to it. I'm guessing out of a month's time, I'm probably, I don't know, 10, 15 hours on average a month.
Okay. Not as I thought it might have been a little bit more, but still that's time you could be taking care of our stuff.
All right.
Okay. Sorry, that was it.
I have a question in mind, and I'm going to just ask it in terms of leaning towards one or the other. Are we leaning towards doing this on our own, or leaning towards staying with West Central? And in terms of the understanding that this is not an official vote or trying to sway anyone, I think that's good language. So I'm going to tell you, I'm not seeing some pictures, and sometimes people are freezing. So rather than doing a hand signal, this does not commit you in anything, but I would ask for an audio response from people. So if you guys could turn your microphones on, I think I can have someone record this, but I've got a list ready to go, and I can cruise down it pretty quickly. So, and I'm going to start with the council, and I'm kind of going down my pictures here. So, Mr. Plunkett, I've got you on the top here. Do you know which way you'd lean today?
Lean towards building the plant ourselves here.
Thank you. Odine?
I originally was leaning toward building a plant, but thinking of the regulatory risks, I'm on the fence about it.
Okay, thank you. Mayor Toland?
Lean.
Yep, very good. Gagne?
I'd second the mayor's motion, and while I've got the camera here, my poll question is what's the ramifications of saying that we're gonna pull out or give our 5-year notice to pull out, but then try to jump back in if in this next year or two if something happens? What's the ramifications on that? And that doesn't have to be answered now, but that's kind of some of my follow-up questions to be had, and I think we have a lot more information to be had here before we make a final determination. But that being said, I'm probably more in favor of, at this point, with the information today, doing our own facility. But there's just so much more to come.
Okay, Mr. Watson?
I'd be leaning towards building our own at this point in time.
All right. Mr. Downing.
I'm in favor of long-term sustainability and financial planning. I think that having our own would allow us to have that. So I'm leaning towards having our own.
Mr. Morissette.
I standing in the middle of the road is dangerous because you get run over there. I'm struggling with this decision because I don't know that there's enough information. I think a couple of different people have said it. You know, what happens if we want to come back in? I certainly don't want to sever the tie altogether with the group down in Ellsworth, but if I was pressed today, I'd say 55% do it ourselves, 45% stay with them. How's that for a chicken answer?
I'll abstain from comment. Mr. Bierstead.
Leaning toward doing our own.
Okay. All right, we're missing a couple UAB members tonight, but I am leaning towards our own as well with some of the shared reservations. I think more information is great. Mr. Swanson. Kevin, you're muted. I'm going to come. Oh, there you go.
You there?
I am. Go ahead.
I'm in Florida, so
okay.
I'd be leaning on what I know today on doing our own.
All right. Mr. Toom.
Well, the numbers certainly plan towards doing on our own, but I'm still not understanding why the O&M costs. I know it includes trucking, but why the O&M costs go up so much. And I know this was brought up before, but maybe West Central could dig into that a little bit. And the other part of it is obviously if we pull out at our 18%, and I know maybe we shouldn't care about these other communities, but that's they're just because we pull out, their costs aren't going to drop 18%. So it seems like it's a big burden to share on our neighbors.
All right. Well, I want to ask, do we have a deadline for dealing with the contractual obligation?
So I was I have an idea to address. What I'm hearing tonight is, yeah, we're thinking our own is okay, but we have a lot of unanswered questions. So I was talking to Chris Gerhardt a little bit about this. There might be a way to buy us some time, Patrick. Maybe we could send them a letter by the end of the year that says we don't intend to renew by the deadline of January 8th, but we would like 6, 12, 18 months to do a little more research, look to see if there's potential funding grants for West Central that we haven't uncovered. Check on the O&M, see if there's a more streamlined future project that they could do. So instead of just cut it off and say, no, we're done, is to let them know, indicate to them that we are not going to renew at this time. And we need to have a little more conversation to see if that's what we really want to do. So kind of a hybrid of what I'm hearing tonight, of pumping the brakes a little bit on signing a new contract and trying to buy ourselves a little bit more time. That sound okay, Patrick?
That seems appropriate. I mean, in the end, we have to make a decision. So, but I think that's perfectly appropriate. So, and of course, again, please be in communication with the questions you have with the right resource, and try to come to a conclusion yourself, because we will vote on this down the road. So that's coming. So
probably Thursday night.
Thursday for some of us. Yeah. All right. Thank you, Mr. Toland. Go ahead.
Just one quick question. Scott bringing it up too, and then I think Mr. Toom would bring it up too about how this is going to affect the other members. I think River Falls has a long history of trying to be a great all that stuff, but I we can use that as part of our decision when it comes to something like this. obviously we don't want to wish bad on anybody else, but I'm assuming everybody else has thought this through and they've all signed their contract. If we decide not to do this, I don't think we can use. I hope that makes sense, Brian. So anyways, I just want to say thanks for everybody for coming. Greatly appreciate it. Thanks, Patrick, for everything.
Patrick, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hey, this is Jason. I'm sorry. Can I just jump in real quick? I think I had an audio problem earlier. Kevin, correct me if I'm wrong. I'd like to clarify for the members of what our intent is here, that the workshop intent was to inform and to find out what additional information you feel you need to make an informed decision. But from here, the intention of staff would be to formally go to the UAB and seek a kind of a formal resolution from the UAB advising council, and then staff will go to council seeking a resolution that would support kind of a direction on that letter to send. So there's nothing binding from this evening. I think what we want to leave is knowing if there's any additional information you need from us to get to a place of comfort, but also I guess we need your wheels spinning in anticipation of your upcoming meetings.
Right. This is what I need to craft something for the UAB to react to on Thursday night, and I think I can get close. So then they can choose to do what they want to do Thursday night. And yes, I will bring that to City Council in December for an action.
Hey, Kevin.
Yes.
Kevin, whatever writing you craft up for the UAB, could you send that copy of that to the council too?
Will do, most definitely.
Thanks.
Patrick, I'd probably, if I may, I would pretty much frame what you said, Kevin, as, throwing a letter of intent out there. And, that we wouldn't be re-signing, but we want an extension on that just to give them the final say off on that. And I think you nailed that on the head. I think we definitely have some more talking to do and maybe a workshop on this further. That's a big decision.
This is heavy lifting, and your attention for this 2.5 hours has been greatly appreciated. So this is a big decision. This is a legacy decision for the city of River Falls. So, big one.
Very good. Well, I'm going to say thank you to the City Council. Thank you to the UAB for your time, for your questions, for your consideration. And I am going to formally adjourn at this time with an invitation to stick around for a couple minutes if you feel you need to address a question towards someone or a future communication. So don't feel you need to drop off just yet. But I'm formally adjourning. So thank you.
This is John. Let me stop the recording then and the streaming.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, John. Thanks, all our guests. Appreciate
Thanks, all.
the help.
I'm going to leave at this point.
Yeah, Christy.